this year, 2021, which consists of 365 days, is about to be over because today is December 31st. How have you been throughout this period? Well, for me, I was in Australia for most of the time. I was still, in Australia in January, especially in Sydney, when there is the Northern Beaches cluster. Well, I do not live in Northern Beaches, but because of this Northern Beaches cluster, there are some restrictions regardless of interstate, which is in New South Wales, or interstate. So originally I planned to go to Perth in early January, when Western Australia declared New South Wales as very low risk state or territory, which means no COVID-19 test, no 14-day quarantine. However, unfortunately, because of that cluster, Western Australia, I think they moved New South Wales from very low risk to not only low risk, and then at that time a medium risk, which means it's not permitted. So instead, I could still travel interstate within New South Wales. I travel interstate to Coffs Harbour, which is somewhere northeast of Sydney instead of Perth, and I postponed the trip to Perth until late February, when Western Australia reclassified New South Wales as a very low risk state, which means very low risk state, which means I do not need to take COVID-19 test, and I do not need to take 14 days of mandatory quarantine if I fly from Sydney to Perth back then. Uni classes throughout the year, it's still online, although some of my friends in Sydney, the University of Sydney, they have mixed classes, which means some of them are face-to-face, some of them are online, which is mostly Zoom. For me, all classes, as in all academic units, are online, so I do not really need to go to a university, except for the Chinese Christian Fellowship, which it's face-to-face for at least like the first half of the year, which means the first semester. And then there was a Trans-Tasman bubble which began sometime late February, which means if you are in Australia, anywhere in Australia and New Zealand, you could basically travel freely. Ideally, during the winter break, I could have visited New Zealand for the third time. Yes, for the third time, as in maybe I suppose I plan to go to Queenstown, which would have been the third time, to Wellington, the capital of New Zealand, which would have been my first ever time, and Auckland, which would have been the second time if you do not include the transit from Hong Kong to Christchurch via Auckland, which was already like 9-ish years ago. Or I could have gone to South Australia, as in to Adelaide. However, Delta variant entered Australia by the first index case in Sydney in mid-June, and yes, it took like 10 days when Gladys Berejiklian was still the Premier of New South Wales. It took 10 days for the state government to lock the whole Greater Sydney down, and there were other restrictions regardless of interstate, and Trans-Tasman, which means between Australia and New Zealand. And eventually, the travel bubble was suspended, I think, from late August until now because of the Delta variant. I think there are 4 extensions of the Greater Sydney lockdown from late June. Yes, and then at that time, I feel like it was a bit lost because you do not really know when the restrictions will end. During that time, the only purposes you can like for going out, it's for a supermarket for daily supplies, ordering takeaway at restaurants, going to a university for education when it's not possible to do so, or to get COVID-19 vaccination. I am fully vaccinated. I got 2 doses of Pfizer in Sydney in Australia. First dose on June 19th, second dose on July 10th, which is exactly 3 weeks of interval as the minimum suggestion. Throughout, as the lockdown goes on, it was more and more clear when the government implement or plan some threshold when we reach how many percent of fully vaccinated, as in it's still 2 doses for now. Some restrictions will ease, and then after 106 days plus 5 hours, the lockdown officially ended. For Greater Sydney itself, ended on October 11, which is really amazing because during lockdown you couldn't even go for a haircut because it's not considered as essential businesses. During that time, uni fellowship continue to be online even though lockdown ends. For church as well, mostly in lockdown during that more than 3.5 months of lockdown. Yes, I spent more than a quarter of the year in lockdown in Greater Sydney when I was still in Australia. But thankfully, as lockdown ended, restriction eased, I got the chance to go back to church, attend face-to-face services back in Sydney, regardless of Sunday service or Wednesday community groups, which were really appreciated. I also, thankfully, with the border restriction ease continue later on, I still get the chance to visit Melbourne for the 4th time. Yes, for the 4th time. Similarly, in late November as last year, as the border between Victoria and New South Wales reopened, which allows test-free, test as in COVID-19 test-free, and also quarantine-free travel interstate. Although admittedly, I did not fly, I did not travel as much as last year, but that really makes sense because of the Greater Sydney lockdown, which lasts for more than a quarter of the year. A quarter of the year. How can you imagine? I couldn't really imagine how I could survive like my other friends, mates, who spent more than a quarter of the year in lockdown in Greater Sydney. As the vaccination rate keep on going up, interstate, and then nationally now, I think 80 something or 90 something percent of fully vaccinated. Restrictions keep on easing, so does international borders. So supposedly the international border for international students would reopen on December 1st. That means if you enter Australia, you do not need to apply for travel exemption, just like Australian permanent resident and citizens, for example. But because of the Omicron, which is another variant apart from Delta, came to Australia sometime late November, they postponed the reopen until December 15th, and now it's still currently open at the moment. So because of the international border reopening, I came back from Australia back to Hong Kong on December 1st as planned, as when the international borders would have been would have opened, although they actually postponed 2 weeks later and then they opened. because Hong Kong, they have like more tough international border restrictions compared to Australia, in my opinion. At that time, Australia, it's still a Group B specific place, medium risk. If you are, as I am fully vaccinated, you had to undergo compulsory quarantine, or in this in your designated quarantine hotel. For me, to be more positive, I would say I spent 14 days of compulsory staycation in Dorsett Hotel in Tsuen Wan. There are several Dorsett hotels around Hong Kong, and you can say my parents booked for me 14 days, 14 nights in Dorsett Hotel Tsuen Wan as my designated quarantine hotel, DQH. Partly because of the international border restrictions eased, and more importantly, it's my grandma passed away, as some of you might have known. It's a bit sad because we spent quite a lot of time with grandma, and sad to see her ability, her in general motor skills drop really severely in the past 10 years, but thankfully she was baptized. She got the chance to know you before she passed away, and now she is living in heaven happily ever after, which is so thankful, so grateful. My flight from Sydney back to Hong Kong was on 30th November 30th evening, and one thing is, on that day Hong Kong government announced, because of the Omicron variant, so they declare whenever there is Omicron variant, they would put that place or that country into Group A high risk. That means you need to undergo 21 days instead of 14 days of compulsory quarantine, and which would take effect on December 2nd. I'm so thankful I arrived, safely back to Hong Kong, because you need to take PCR test 72 hours before the flight, although now it's 48 hours, and I tested negative so that you could board the flight, and I safely arrived back to Hong Kong on December 1st, which is a day before Australia was moved to Group A high risk. I have a friend also from Hong Kong. She's studying psychology in Curtin University in Perth. She planned to go back to Hong Kong on December 4th, which was already 21 days of compulsory quarantine. She would have left compulsory quarantine on December 25th, which is Christmas Day. However, because of some flight cancellations, and there are obviously more flights. Anyway, there are more flights from Sydney to Hong Kong twice daily at that time, as opposed to Perth to Hong Kong twice weekly, which is 7 times of that difference. So she came back to Hong Kong on December 10th, which is almost a week after the original date. So she would need to spend Silent Night, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day, in general Christmas weekend, in compulsory quarantine, and she just left quarantine today, December 31st, after 21 days. 21 days of compulsory quarantine. What the heck? How could you imagine? I'm so thankful, and I could leave 14 days of compulsory quarantine, and so really thankful for her. She could also leave quarantine now, right in time at the end of the year, December 31st, 2021. Thankfully, yes, apart from that, I haven't been back to Hong Kong for more than 1.5 years. I really miss Hong Kong, and I got the chance finally back to meet my family and friends in Hong Kong physically. That's the most important, because face to face is actually the actual gym. So I took like 7 flights this year in 2021. So Sydney to Coffs Harbour return, Sydney to Perth return, Sydney to Melbourne return, and Sydney to Hong Kong. So it's basically 2 interstate flights, 4 interstate flights, and 1 international flight. As you can see, you can't really compare to last year because of the Greater Sydney lockdown. I spent like 3.5 months, more than a quarter of the year in lockdown, and thankfully as the vaccination rates goes up, restriction ease, interstate, internationally. Now I'm safely back in Hong Kong, and as in like the Hong Kong restrictions, you can't really compare to Australia, but it's still like church in Hong Kong, you can still go face to face, although like the gathering size or in terms of the vaccination status to enter some premises, it's quite different to Australia, I think, compared to like Sydney or Melbourne. Yes, I went to Sydney. I went to Melbourne after the lockdown, and you need to when they need to use some vaccination certificate or like your status in general to prove not to prove or to enter the some premises. So Hong Kong, they have the app called Leave Home Safe. Sydney, they have Service New South Wales. Victoria, they have Service Victoria. There are some things in common, which is in Hong Kong and in New South Wales, you need to check into some premises and also check out to leave to indicate how much time, the actual period of time you spend in a specific place. Whereas in Service Victoria, you only need to check in. You do not need to check out, which is also the same in Western Australia. I do not understand why. I do not understand the mechanism, but yes, this is what in general of 2021 across January, when there's only like some clusters, when things are still like mostly in face to face. Then variant came to Australia, Delta mid-June, Omicron late November, and things changed a lot. Vaccination rates going up, lockdown, restriction ease. Now I'm back in Hong Kong. Yeah, I am really thankful. Hopefully in 2022 things will be better in terms of like socially and in general in Hong Kong and in Australia, including but not limited to Sydney. To what's my future, I am not pretty sure, but God will do the best. I have done the best, and God will do the rest. So that's a wrap up of 2021 after 365 days. Hope your comment or like to this video will be appreciated. Your comment, yes, and also your subscription to this channel, and also my Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter. And I will see you guys next day, next month, next year, January 1st, 2022.